The most dangerous mistake a person can make is judging someone before checking the facts. The polished marble floor of Sterling National Bank reflected the morning sunlight pouring through towering glass walls, giving the lobby an almost cathedral-like glow, but that sense of elegance shattered the instant Officer Ryan Collins snapped a pair of handcuffs around Elijah Carter's wrists. Conversation stopped. The rhythmic tapping of expensive shoes froze in place. Coffee cups hovered halfway to waiting lips. Dozens of strangers stared without saying a word, as if they had already decided exactly who the man in front of them was. Elijah, a 54-year-old black man dressed in a simple charcoal suit with worn leather shoes and a weathered briefcase resting beside his feet, never resisted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply lifted his eyes toward the large brass clock hanging above the customer service desk, studying the second hand as calmly as though he were waiting for a train instead of standing in handcuffs inside one of the largest financial institutions in the state. Officer Collins tightened his grip just enough to make it unmistakably clear who believed he controlled the room. "You thought nobody would notice," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "People like you always think you can walk out before anyone asks questions." A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. Others lowered their eyes. Some quietly reached for their phones, sensing they were witnessing something they would later replay over dinner tables and social media feeds. Behind the front counter, teller Sarah Mitchell folded her arms with visible confidence. She had been the one who pointed at Elijah only moments earlier after a customer reported a missing cash envelope. In her mind, the conclusion had already been reached. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't wonder whether there could be another explanation. She simply believed the quiet man standing near the counter had to be responsible. "I saw him holding the envelope," she insisted. "That's all the proof anyone should need." Elijah slowly turned his head toward her. There was no anger in his expression. Only disappointment. "Did you see what happened before that?" he asked softly. Sarah hesitated for half a second before looking away. Officer Collins stepped between them. "Save it," he interrupted. "You can explain everything downtown." Elijah looked back at the clock. 3 minutes and 46 seconds. His calmness unsettled the officer far more than any argument could have. Most innocent people protested. Most guilty people panicked. This man did neither. Instead, Elijah glanced toward a security camera mounted high above the entrance, then quietly scanned the lobby as if making mental notes about every person standing there. His eyes briefly met those of a tall man wearing a Navy security blazer near the elevators. For the shortest moment, the security director's face turned pale, almost as though he recognized someone he never expected to see standing in handcuffs. Before he could take a single step forward, Elijah gave the slightest shake of his head, silently telling him to stay exactly where he was. Nobody else noticed the exchange. Officer Collins certainly didn't. He was too busy accepting the approving nods from people who assumed he had prevented a crime. Elijah lowered his gaze once more toward the ticking clock. "For minutes," he said quietly, almost to himself. Officer Collins laughed. "For minutes until what?" Elijah finally looked directly into the officer's eyes, his voice steady enough to silence the whispers spreading across the lobby. "For minutes until everyone in this building learns whether you arrested a thief or arrested the wrong man." 22 minutes earlier, the lobby of Sterling National Bank carried the quiet confidence that only old money seemed to possess. Sunlight stretched across polished marble floors while soft piano music drifted almost unnoticed beneath the conversations of investment clients, retirees, and business owners beginning another ordinary Tuesday morning. Employees smiled with practiced precision, greeting familiar faces by name while screens displayed market numbers that changed every few seconds. Nothing about the building suggested that before the hour was over, every assumption inside it would be challenged. Elijah Carter stepped through the revolving door alone, carrying a weathered brown leather briefcase that had traveled with him for nearly 20 years. His charcoal suit was neatly pressed but far from fashionable, and the silver watch on his wrist showed tiny scratches collected over decades rather than the shine of something recently purchased. He paused just inside the entrance, not because he was uncertain where to go, but because he wanted to observe every greeting. Every glance. Every decision. He had learned long ago that people revealed their true character during ordinary moments, not extraordinary ones. A young couple entered behind him. The receptionist welcomed them immediately with a bright smile and offered complimentary coffee before they had spoken a single word. Moments later, an elderly veteran carrying paperwork received patient directions from another employee who walked him all the way to the investment offices. Elijah watched quietly, genuinely pleased to see kindness offered so naturally. Then another customer entered, a young black man wearing work boots and a reflective construction jacket. The atmosphere changed almost invisibly. A security guard began watching him from across the lobby. The receptionist's smile became noticeably smaller. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody stepped forward to help. The young man eventually found the correct line on his own without saying anything. Elijah noticed every detail. None of them were dramatic enough to trigger complaints on their own. Together, however, they formed a pattern that could not easily be ignored. He slowly walked toward the customer service area, carefully taking in the familiar architecture surrounding him. Every column, every hallway, every conference room carried memories that nobody around him could possibly recognize. Years earlier, he had approved the funding that restored this historic building instead of replacing it with another glass tower. He believed institutions earned trust by preserving history rather than erasing it. Yet this morning he wanted history to remain silent. No announcement had been made. No executive meeting had been scheduled on the public calendar. Even the chief executive officer believed Elijah would arrive through a private entrance later that afternoon. Instead, Elijah had chosen to enter exactly as any ordinary customer would. He wanted the building to introduce itself before anyone introduced him. As he approached the teller stations, Sarah Mitchell glanced up from her computer. Her expression remained professional, but it lacked the warmth she had shown the customer standing immediately ahead of him. Elijah noticed the difference without reacting. He offered a polite smile anyway. Sarah nodded briefly before returning her attention to paperwork, leaving him waiting although another window had quietly become available. Elijah simply rested both hands on his briefcase and looked once more across the lobby. Somewhere above him, security cameras recorded every movement, every conversation, and every choice. He had not come searching for mistakes. He had come searching for the truth, whatever that truth happened to be. Sarah Mitchell finally looked up and offered the same polite sentence she had repeated hundreds of times that month. "Good morning. How may I help you today?" Her voice sounded professional, but it carried a distance that Elijah had already heard directed towards several other customers that morning. Elijah smiled gently and placed his worn leather briefcase on the polished counter. "I would like to make a scheduled deposit and update a few records before an afternoon meeting," he answered calmly. Sarah typed a few words into her computer without looking directly at him. "Do you have an appointment with someone here?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "I do." "May I have the name?" she continued. Elijah paused for only a moment before replying, "Not yet. I would prefer to finish my transaction first." Sarah's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. The answer was unusual, although not against any policy. She glanced briefly toward another teller, who returned an almost invisible shrug. Meanwhile, Elijah quietly observed everything happening around him. A businessman wearing an expensive navy suit approached the neighboring counter, and within seconds another employee greeted him by name, offered bottled water, and thanked him for his years of loyalty. Across the lobby, the young construction worker Elijah had noticed earlier was still waiting for assistance while two employees discussed paperwork behind their desks. None of these moments alone proved unfair treatment. Together they formed a picture that had become increasingly familiar over the past several months. Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small folded note. It contained only a few handwritten words and a series of dates. Every date represented a customer complaint received by the corporate ethics office. Different names. Different stories. The same branch. The same uncomfortable pattern. He slipped the note back into his pocket before anyone noticed. This visit had never been about money. The deposit waiting inside his briefcase could have been completed electronically in less than 60 seconds. He had chosen to come in person because numbers inside reports could never fully capture the atmosphere inside a room. Respect could not be measured by quarterly earnings. Character revealed itself through eye contact, patience, and the assumptions people made before asking a single question. As Sarah continued reviewing the account information displayed on her monitor, a tall man wearing a security blazer emerged from a hallway leading to the administrative offices. His name badge identified him as David Brooks, Director of Security. The moment his eye settled on Elijah, his expression changed completely. Surprise appeared first, followed almost instantly by concern. He instinctively took one step forward before stopping himself. Elijah noticed him immediately. Without speaking, he gave the slightest nod, followed by an almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was enough. David understood the silent instruction. Do not interrupt. Do not announce anything. Let the morning unfold exactly as it would have for any ordinary customer. David slowly turned away, pretending to inspect another area of the lobby while discreetly speaking into the microphone clipped beneath his collar. Sarah never saw the exchange. Neither did the customers waiting nearby. Elijah remained perfectly still, his hands resting comfortably on the counter as though he had nowhere else to be. Outside, another stream of customers entered through the revolving doors, carrying umbrellas against a light summer drizzle that had begun to fall. Inside, everything still appeared ordinary. Yet beneath the polished floors, carefully rehearsed smiles, and quiet conversations, an invisible test had already begun. The people inside believed they were evaluating a customer. They had no idea they were revealing themselves instead. The quiet rhythm of the lobby continued for several more minutes, almost convincing everyone inside that the morning would unfold like any other. Sarah finally finished reviewing the information on her screen and looked back at Elijah with a carefully measured smile. Thank you for waiting, sir. I will be with you in just a moment. Elijah nodded politely. Take your time. His calm response contrasted with the growing impatience of another customer approaching the neighboring counter. An elderly woman with neatly styled white hair balanced a leather handbag on one arm while holding a large sealed envelope against her chest. She greeted Sarah warmly before stepping aside to organize several documents. As she searched through her purse for identification, the envelope slipped from her grasp without her noticing. It landed softly near the edge of the customer line. Several people walked past it without looking down. Elijah noticed it immediately. He glanced toward the woman, who was still focused on her paperwork, then bent down and carefully picked up the envelope with one hand. There was nothing dramatic about the gesture. It was the kind of small act of courtesy that happened every day in places where strangers still looked after one another. Elijah took 2 slow steps toward the counter and gently placed the envelope where the woman could easily see it. Before he could say a single word, Sarah looked up from her monitor. Her eyes landed on the envelope in Elijah's hand for only an instant, but that instant was enough for her mind to complete a story that had never actually happened. Her expression changed immediately. Please. Put that down, she said, her voice noticeably sharper than before. Elijah did exactly as she asked, placing the envelope on the polished counter without hesitation. It belongs to the lady beside me, he replied calmly. The elderly customer turned around, confused by the sudden tension. Before she could explain that she had dropped anything, Sarah reached for the envelope and pulled it closer. Did you take this from another customer? She asked. The entire lobby seemed to grow quieter. Elijah remained composed. No, It fell onto the floor. I picked it up so I could return it. Sarah looked from Elijah to the envelope and then toward the security cameras mounted overhead, but instead of asking anyone nearby what they had seen, she pressed a silent security button beneath the counter. The action was almost invisible to everyone except David Brooks, who had been quietly monitoring the lobby from across the room. His shoulders stiffened the instant he recognized the signal. He reached for the radio clipped to his jacket but hesitated. Elijah had instructed him not to interfere. That instruction suddenly felt much heavier than before. Nearby, the elderly woman finally looked into her purse and realized the envelope was missing. "Oh goodness," she said. "I thought I had misplaced it." She reached toward the counter, but Sarah gently stopped her. "Please wait just a moment. We need to clarify what happened." Elijah looked at the woman with quiet reassurance. "Everything will be all right." His voice remained steady, almost surprisingly so. Outside the front entrance, a marked police vehicle slowly rolled into the visitor parking area as light rain continued tapping against the tall glass windows. Inside, nobody seemed to notice except David, whose eyes briefly closed before opening again. He understood something the others did not. The next few minutes would reveal far more than the fate of a misplaced envelope. They would reveal the character of everyone who believed they already knew the truth. The glass entrance doors opened with a quiet mechanical whisper, and Officer Ryan Collins stepped into the lobby with the steady confidence of someone who expected immediate cooperation wherever he went. Rainwater glistened across the shoulders of his dark uniform before quickly disappearing beneath the warm air inside the bank. He acknowledged Sarah with a brief nod, then shifted his attention toward Elijah without asking a single question. The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Customers who had been focused on deposits and appointments now turned their attention toward the growing scene. Sarah pointed toward the envelope resting on the counter. "That is the man I told you about," she said with certainty. "I saw him holding this customer's cash envelope." Ryan glanced at the elderly woman, then at Elijah, then back to Sarah. He never asked who had dropped the envelope. He never asked whether anyone else had witnessed what happened. Instead, he walked directly toward Elijah with measured steps. "Sir, I need you to step away from the counter," he said firmly. Elijah complied immediately, taking 2 calm steps backward and folding his hands in front of him. "Of course, officer," he answered. "May I first explain what happened?" Ryan barely acknowledged the request. "I will ask the questions." The elderly woman finally stepped forward, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Officer, I believe I dropped the envelope myself." Ryan raised one hand politely without looking at her. "I appreciate your concern. Please allow me to handle this." She hesitated, surprised that her statement had been interrupted before she could finish. Elijah remained remarkably composed. "The security cameras will show exactly what occurred," he said evenly. "There is no need for anyone to rely on assumptions." Ryan slowly looked toward the cameras mounted above the lobby before returning his attention to Elijah. "We will get to that later," he replied. "Right now I need to determine why you were handling another customer's property." Elijah answered without hesitation. "Because it was lying on the floor, and I intended to return it." Several customers quietly exchanged glances. One middle-aged man who had been standing only a few feet away cleared his throat. "Officer, I actually think I saw him pick it up after the lady dropped it." Ryan turned toward the man for only a brief moment. "Thank you, sir. I will take everyone's statements if necessary." Then, almost immediately, his attention returned to Elijah as though every other voice had become background noise. Across the lobby, David Brooks discreetly reached into his jacket pocket and unlocked his company phone. Without attracting attention, he opened the live security system and confirmed that every camera covering the customer area was functioning perfectly. The footage already existed. The truth was already recorded. Yet nobody had requested to see it. David looked toward Elijah once more, silently hoping for permission to intervene. Instead, Elijah gave the slightest glance toward the brass clock hanging above the lobby. David understood. "Wait. Not yet." Ryan took another step closer. "Sir, do you have any identification with you?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, officer. I do." "Keep your hands where I can see them until I tell you otherwise," Ryan instructed. Elijah complied without complaint. His breathing remained slow. His expression remained peaceful. There was something unusual about the way he accepted every instruction, not with fear or resignation, but with the quiet patience of someone who already knew how the story would end. Around him, the whispers grew louder. Some people believed they were watching a theft investigation. Others were no longer certain. but almost nobody realized they were witnessing a much larger test, one that had nothing to do with a misplaced envelope and everything to do with how quickly judgment could replace truth when appearances became the only evidence anyone chose to believe. Ryan Collins maintained his steady gaze, waiting for Elijah to reach for his identification, but Elijah remained exactly where he was, his hands visible, his posture relaxed, and his expression unchanged. The silence that settled over the lobby became almost heavier than the conversation itself. Most people expected anxiety in moments like this. They expected hurried explanations, nervous gestures, or frustrated arguments. Instead, Elijah seemed almost detached from the tension surrounding him, as though his attention rested somewhere beyond the marble walls of the bank. His eyes drifted once again toward the large brass clock. 3 minutes remained. Ryan noticed the glance and frowned. "You seem awfully interested in that clock," he said. Elijah offered a faint smile. "It reminds me that every decision has a moment before it becomes permanent." Ryan folded his arms. "You speak like a lawyer." "No," Elijah answered calmly. "I simply believe facts deserve a chance to arrive before conclusions do." The words lingered in the air. Sarah shifted uneasily behind the counter, convincing herself that confidence did not prove innocence. She quietly organized the documents in front of her, avoiding eye contact with the customers who had begun whispering among themselves. The elderly woman looked increasingly troubled. "Officer," she tried again, "I truly believe I dropped the envelope." Ryan acknowledged her with a courteous nod but kept his focus on Elijah. "I understand your concern. We will sort everything out shortly." Elijah never interrupted. Instead, he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket after Ryan gave him permission to retrieve his wallet. Along with his identification, a small silver key slipped into his hand before resting against his palm. It was unlike any ordinary key. Its polished surface reflected the overhead lights, and a finely engraved emblem decorated the head of the key with the initials SNB surrounding a small oak tree. Ryan noticed it immediately. "What is that?" he asked. Elijah glanced down briefly. "An old key." Ryan extended his hand. "May I see it?" Elijah placed it carefully into the officer's palm without hesitation. Ryan examined it for several seconds. It felt unusually heavy, clearly crafted from solid metal rather than inexpensive alloy. The engraving appeared official, yet unfamiliar. "Interesting souvenir," Ryan said with a skeptical smile. "Does it open some kind of safety deposit box?" Elijah answered with complete honesty. "Yes. Something like that." Ryan handed the key back, unconvinced. To him it looked like an expensive novelty purchased by someone hoping to appear more important than they really were. Across the lobby, David Brooks recognized the emblem instantly. His heartbeat quickened. Very few people inside the bank had ever seen that key. It belonged to the original founder's vault, a secure room beneath the headquarters that had remained untouched for decades except during annual board reviews. Possessing it required authorization from the highest level of ownership. David discreetly unlocked his phone again and opened an encrypted contact list. Without speaking, he pressed a single name. Michael Grant. The chief executive officer answered almost immediately. David kept his voice low. "Sir, he is here." There was a brief silence before Michael responded. "Already?" "Yes, sir." "Does anyone know?" David looked toward the lobby, where Ryan continued questioning Elijah while customers quietly watched. "No, sir. And I believe we have a serious situation developing." Michael did not ask for further details. "Do not interfere," he said firmly. "I am leaving the executive office now." The call ended. David slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward the brass clock. 2 minutes and 18 seconds remained. Elijah had not exaggerated. Somewhere beyond the lobby, events had already begun moving toward a conclusion that nobody standing near the teller counter could possibly imagine. They believed they were waiting for answers from one quiet customer. In reality, the entire building was waiting for someone far more important to arrive. The second hand reached the top of the brass clock with quiet precision just as the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened. Every conversation faded naturally, not because anyone had been told to remain silent, but because something about the sudden movement drew every eye across the room. Michael Grant, the chief executive officer of Sterling National Bank, stepped into the lobby accompanied by two senior executives from corporate compliance. He walked with purpose, his expression calm but unusually focused. Employees who recognized him immediately straightened their posture. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Visits from the chief executive officer to a neighborhood branch almost never happened without notice. Ryan Collins noticed the approaching group and assumed they were simply responding to a routine security concern. He remained beside Elijah, confident that he had handled the situation exactly as expected. Michael's eyes swept across the lobby until they settled on one unmistakable sight. Elijah Carter stood quietly near the teller counter, still waiting with complete composure. For a brief moment, Michael stopped walking altogether. The surprise on his face lasted only a fraction of a second before it was replaced by something much more serious. Without greeting anyone else, he continued forward. Every employee watched carefully, expecting him to approach the manager or perhaps thank Officer Collins for protecting the bank. Instead, Michael walked directly past both of them and stopped in front of Elijah. The entire lobby seemed to stop breathing. Then Michael extended his hand with unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I sincerely apologize for keeping you waiting." Elijah accepted the handshake with the same quiet calm he had shown since entering the building. "Good morning, Michael," he replied. "It has certainly been an interesting visit." Sarah's face lost its color. Ryan looked from one man to the other, unable to understand why the chief executive officer was speaking to the quiet customer as though they had known each other for years. Before anyone could ask another question, David Brooks stepped forward carrying a slim black portfolio. Without saying a word, he opened it and handed several documents to Michael. Michael reviewed only the first page before turning it toward Ryan. "Officer," he said politely, "I believe you should see this." Ryan accepted the document with a puzzled expression. Across the top appeared the official corporate seal of Sterling National Bank. Beneath it was a list of voting shareholders. The first name occupied almost the entire page. Elijah Carter. 70% controlling ownership. Ryan blinked once, then again, convinced he had misunderstood what he was reading. He looked up at Elijah, then back at the document. "This cannot be right," he murmured. Michael answered, without raising his voice, "It is entirely correct." Another compliance executive quietly produced Elijah's scheduled board agenda for that afternoon, complete with meeting times, executive signatures, and security authorization. Everything matched. Every detail confirmed the same reality. Sarah stared at the papers as though they belonged to another world. Only minutes earlier she had questioned whether Elijah belonged inside the building at all. Now she realized he possessed greater authority than anyone working inside the branch. Yet Elijah showed no satisfaction. He did not smile. He did not embarrass anyone. Instead, he slowly looked around the lobby at the customers who had witnessed every moment since he arrived. "Ownership is not the important part," he said gently. "The important part is that nobody needed to know who I was before deciding how I should be treated." Those words settled over the room with far greater weight than the documents themselves. In that instant, the misplaced envelope no longer seemed like the center of the story. It had become only the mirror that revealed every assumption made before anyone had chosen to look for the truth. No one spoke for several long seconds. The silence inside the lobby felt heavier than any accusation that had been made only moments earlier. Officer Ryan Collins slowly lowered the document in his hands, reading Elijah Carter's name again as if repeating it might somehow change what was printed on the page. It did not. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen behind the teller counter, unable to reconcile the quiet customer she had judged with the man whose signature appeared throughout the corporate record she had processed for years without ever seeing his face. Michael Grant looked around the lobby before speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Before anyone says another word, let us begin with the facts. He turned toward David Brooks. Please display the security footage from the customer lobby. Within moments, the large customer information screen switched from market updates to the internal camera recording. Every person in the lobby watched in complete silence. The video showed the elderly woman accidentally dropping the sealed envelope as she searched through her handbag. It showed several customers walking past without noticing it. It showed Elijah bending down, carefully picking up the envelope, taking only 2 steps, and placing it on the counter where it could be safely returned. Not once did he attempt to open it. Not once did he hide it. Not once did he move toward the exit. Every second of the recording confirmed exactly what Elijah had calmly explained from the beginning. When the video ended, nobody rushed to defend the earlier assumptions. There was nothing left to argue. The truth had arrived exactly as Elijah had said it would. The elderly woman took a slow step forward, her voice filled with regret. "Sir, I owe you an apology. You were trying to help me, and I did not speak quickly enough." Elijah offered her a gentle smile. "You have nothing to apologize for. Kindness should never require permission." His answer only deepened the discomfort spreading through the room. Michael turned toward Sarah, but his tone remained respectful rather than harsh. "Did anyone request this footage before contacting law enforcement?" Sarah lowered her eyes. "No, sir." "Did anyone interview the witnesses standing only a few feet away?" She quietly shook her head. Michael then looked toward Ryan. "Officer Collins, were you informed that multiple people had attempted to explain what they observed?" Ryan hesitated before answering honestly. "Some people tried to speak, but I believed I already understood the situation." Michael nodded slowly, not with satisfaction but with disappointment. "That is exactly why we have procedures. Evidence exists to protect everyone, including those who believe they are making the right decision." Elijah remained completely still while the conversation unfolded around him. He had not interrupted anyone. He had not demanded an apology. He had simply allowed the evidence to speak for itself. Michael faced the customers gathered throughout the lobby. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened today should concern every person who enters this building. Our institution cannot ask the public to trust us if we are unwilling to verify facts before reaching conclusions." Several customers quietly nodded. Others looked toward Elijah with expressions very different from those they had worn earlier. They no longer saw an unfamiliar customer standing alone at a teller window. They saw a man whose dignity had never depended upon recognition, wealth, or authority. Elijah finally broke the silence with a quiet observation that seemed to settle into every corner of the room. Character is revealed long before titles are. No one challenged those words, because by then everyone understood that the misplaced envelope had never been the true test. The real test had been whether ordinary people would choose evidence over assumption when they had the opportunity to do both. The lobby slowly returned to motion, but nothing inside Sterling National Bank felt the same anymore. Conversations resumed in quiet voices, footsteps echoed across the marble floor once again, and the rain continued falling gently outside the tall windows, yet every person present understood they had witnessed something far greater than a misunderstanding over a misplaced envelope. Michael Grant turned toward Elijah with visible respect. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of every employee in this organization, I sincerely apologize for what happened today." Elijah acknowledged the apology with a small nod. "Thank you, Michael. An apology matters, but only if it becomes the beginning of something better." He looked around the room before continuing. "If this could happen to me while standing inside a building I have invested in for years, imagine how many ordinary customers leave believing no one will ever hear their story." Those words settled deeply over the employees gathered nearby. Sarah Mitchell quietly stepped out from behind the teller counter. Her confidence had disappeared, replaced by genuine reflection. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "I judged you before I knew the truth. I cannot change what I did, but I am truly sorry." Elijah met her eyes without anger. "The truth is that you should not have needed to know who I was. Every customer deserves the same respect before their name, profession, or financial statement becomes part of the conversation." Sarah lowered her head, understanding that his response carried neither humiliation nor revenge. It carried responsibility. Officer Ryan Collins stood silently beside them, still holding the document that had changed everything. He took a slow breath before speaking. "I should have listened to the witnesses. I should have asked to review the camera footage before reaching a conclusion. I believed I was acting quickly, but I was not acting carefully." Elijah nodded. There is a difference between confidence and certainty. Confidence protects people when it is guided by evidence. Certainty without evidence can harm people who have done nothing wrong. Michael turned toward the compliance executive standing nearby. "Effective immediately, I am ordering a complete review of customer service procedures across every branch. Security footage must be reviewed whenever available before assumptions become actions. Every employee will receive additional training focused on fairness, accountability, and respectful treatment for every customer." David Brooks added quietly, "We will also reopen every unresolved complaint submitted to the ethics office during the past several years." Elijah smiled for the first time that morning. Not because he had been recognized as the majority owner, but because the conversation had finally shifted away from him and toward the people who would enter the bank tomorrow, next month, and years from now. That had always been the purpose of his visit. He picked up his weathered briefcase and looked once more at the brass clock that had counted every second of the morning. Then he turned toward the entrance. Several customers stepped aside without being asked, not because of his ownership, but because they now saw him differently. As Elijah reached the revolving door, the elderly woman whose envelope had started the entire chain of events smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for reminding all of us what grace looks like." Elijah paused before stepping outside into the light summer rain. "Grace is not proven when people treat us well," he replied gently. "It is revealed by how we choose to respond when they do not." He walked into the gray morning without security escorts, without celebration, and without another word. Behind him, Sterling National Bank remained standing exactly where it had always been, but the people inside would never see it the same way again. Some believed wealth had changed the outcome of the day. They were mistaken. Wealth only uncovered the truth. Character had been on display from the very beginning. And in the end, the greatest lesson inside that beautiful building was never about who owned 70% of the bank. It was about remembering that dignity belongs to every person long before anyone learns their name.